what I want to focus on today is using images in your application or in your app and be able to switch images programmatically and show you how to use the XC assets folder to install those images. And I'm going to do a little brief, short, simple demonstration of Photoshop as how to work with images from a graphic standpoint. And you can do this with other products if you don't have Photoshop. Photoshop is certainly the industry standard, and we do teach beginning and advanced classes on Photoshop. It has a lot of bells and whistles. It is not necessarily the easiest program to learn, or certainly not the easiest to master without a lot of effort and work. But I'll show you how to do some simple things. I mean, you should be able to go in, load an image or open an image and resize it, maybe crop it to get rid of stuff, and maybe even change. We'll do a little bit of tone and color changes, show you how you can do some things there that are kind of fun. There is so many bells and whistles. There's all these different filters. You can add watercolors and all kinds of stuff. But when you think about it, we live in a visual world with our iPhones or our iPads. And so it's important as a developer that you have some understanding of how to work with graphics. And for that very reason, we have Photoshop as a required course in our larger program of mobile app development. So I'm going to go into Canvas. Can you all see my Canvas site here?
Yes.
Okay. So I'm going to use some files this morning in the demonstration. So if you want to follow along, I'm going to have you go past this point that says ignore everything past this point. Go into week 3. And I added at the bottom of week 3 this azimages.zip. So I'll give you a couple more minutes to finish downloading that. If you'll unzip it, you're going to see a bunch of images there. Actually, you're going to see a Photoshop image, and then you're going to see a folder called iOS. And that iOS folder contains 4 images, but each one at 3 different resolutions. And that's one of the challenges in developing for iPhone and iPad. We have all kinds of different resolutions out there. And you think about one of those older iPhones, the SE or iPhone 5, versus the iPhone 11 that we have today, or an iPad 12.5-inch iPad. Those resolutions are so different, and the quality of graphics that will fit that screen is very different. So Apple has us as developers to create 3 versions of every graphic. So we have one standard, one at 2 times the resolution, one at 3 times the resolution. So I'll walk through the process of how I create those, and they have to be named a specific way. All right, I'm going to go over to Xcode, and this is the project we're going to create today. So I'm going to run this on the simulator. Now I'm running it on, I designed it for an iPad. So I'm just going to show it to you, then we'll walk through the process, and I'll recreate this from scratch. So I have what's called a UI image view that's displaying a graphic, and the graphics are all embedded in a folder. Actually, it really is a folder inside our Xcode project called XC assets. It's not X cassettes, it's XC for Xcode assets. So then I have 4 buttons, and each of these buttons change the image in the image view. And I programmed this so that all 4 of these buttons use the same piece of code. Because I want to show you also today how you can have multiple objects utilize the same piece of code. And we'll use a switch statement to do that. Okay, so that's our project. Now, I'm going to end my project, go back to Xcode here, cancel, stop, and we're going to build this from scratch. Before we do that, let me go into Photoshop and give you a quick demonstration of Photoshop. Okay. And I'm just going to open up a new file here. In fact, let's do this. Let's so all these images that I used, if you're looking for a source of images, we have to worry about copyright. So we can't just, in this class, we can use copyrighted images as long as they're not published. But I try to always find or public domain or Creative Commons licensed photographs that I can use in my videos, in my project demonstrations. So all these photographs came out of my favorite source, You're looking for things like this, in this case, well-known places. And I'm going to go to, jump over here, to Wiki Commons. Now, if you're not familiar with Wiki Commons, it is part of Wikipedia. Whoops. I guess I didn't do that right. Let's Google it, google.com. Or it might be Wikimedia. Let's just do Wiki Commons. There we go. What's it .org? So Wiki Commons is part of Wikipedia. And it is images that, for the most part, people have uploaded and given license to use. So they're usually Creative Commons license, which oftentimes means you need to give an attribute to the photographer. Sometimes they're public domain, depending on where they came from. Any government photos usually are public domain. So I wanted to search for an image. Actually, since I've got other images there, let's do something. Give me a good place here in Arizona to search for. Actually, we'll search for Sedona. I know we'll find images for Sedona. So I'm going to search for Sedona. And kind of scroll through here and find a good photo. Now you'll see at the bottom, it's showing me 20. I can look at 50, 100, 250, 500 at a time. Let's do 50 at a time. We should find something good within the first 50. I'm kind of looking for a nice image of the Red Rocks. Now here's the city. So I'm going to just take the town of Sedona, Red Rock Street. And down here it shows you the size. In this case, it's 3008 by 200. Oftentimes there's multiple sizes in here. So I'm going to click on this. There's the image. And then below the image, you can see the different sizes. Now, I usually start with the very largest size. So when I'm designing for iPhone or even Android, you're going to find in any graphics package, if you scale the image up, it's not going to look very good because these are bitmaps. These are just a collection of dots. And if I go from 100 square dots to 500 square dots, all it's going to do is spread those out and duplicate those, and you get a really blurry image. So I start with the largest image and then go downward. And Photoshop does a great job of scaling downward. It also, of everything I've tried, does a decent job of scaling upward slightly. So it interpolates those bits very well, or those pixels very well, in making something a little bit larger. If you try to go too big, though, it's going to get really ugly. So we can click on the size here. I'm going to go 3008 by 200. So there's my image. And I'm just going to right-click on it and just choose Save Image As. And I'm going to save this into a folder that I have. And you can save this anywhere you like. But I have the folder that I created these other images in, which is in iOS. And I have a folder here called iOS Images. Okay. So I'm just going to save this. I'm just going to save it as Sedona. And we'll click Save. Okay, so I saved that. I'm going to go back in my history a little bit here. I want to go back to Wikimedia Commons. And here you will also find information about who the author is and any license information. So usually they'll show you the license information right about here. I don't see anything as far as attribution. I probably should check this first. So it is Creative Commons license. You are free to share, to remix. You must give appropriate credit. So somewhere on here, I want to add in who the author is. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to copy this information to my clipboard. So I'm going to highlight through that, do a Command C. Okay, questions so far? All right, I'm going to go to Photoshop, and I'm going to open that file in Photoshop. So let's go to, I'm going to close that. Let's go to File, Open. I'm going to go find that file. And there is Sedona JPEG. Okay, so I'm going to open that up. Now, I want this to be a certain size, and the other images I started at made them 3,000 by 2,000. So again, I like to start large and go down. When we go to create the UI image view in our project, realize it's using units as far as measurements and not pixels. So you can actually Google, if you have an iPad, you could Google what the actual pixel dimensions are for the display, and that's a good idea to kind of get an idea of how you work with things. But this 3,000 by 2,000 should work pretty well for an iPad. So I'm going to go to the image menu. By the way, I do image size. It'll show me the size, and I can change the size of the image. In canvas size, I can actually change the size of the canvas, which will shrink everything down. So right now, my image is 3008 by 2000. I can see that down here in the little status bar. Okay, that's pretty close. I went 3000 by 2000. I need to crop off 8 pixels. Not a big deal because they'll just get absorbed into my images when I upload them. However, let's say this was a 4000 by 3000 image, and I wanted to size it down to 3000 by 2000. What I would do first is go to the image size, and I would size this down to one of those sizes. Now there's a little chain link here that you can do this proportionally or non-proportionally. You generally want to have that proportional link checked, so you see the little connection between width and height. If I were to change this down to 1000, notice it's going to change the width as well, proportionally. Well, I want this 3000 by 2000. This is already a size that I basically want. I still just have 8 pixels on the sides that I need to get rid of. So I get this down to the size that I want on at least one dimension. The other dimension should be larger. I'm going to click OK. Didn't really change anything. And then I'm going to go to the image menu and choose canvas size. Now this is a little bit different. In canvas size, I'm changing basically the dimensions of the image and not necessarily the coordinates or the display of that image. So down at the bottom, we have an anchor. And there's a little circle here. Right now it's going to anchor in the center, which means if I trim anything off, it's going to trim it on the outside edges. Maybe I want to trim, let's say I had too much height, and I wanted to trim maybe 100 pixels down at the bottom. I'd click up here, and it's going to anchor it at the top, so any changes I make are going to occur down here on the bottom or left and right. If I want to anchor it on the upper left-hand corner, I can do that. Now any changes are going to be on the right-hand side and the bottom. Okay, I'm going to go back to the center. And again, we're only going to trim off 8 pixels. So by doing the center, we're going to trim 4 pixels off on the left and 4 on the right. All I'm going to do is change this to 3000 rather than 3008 and click OK. And we get a little warning saying, hey, we're going to lose some of the image. That's exactly what I want to do. I'm going to say proceed. And there's my image now. You see down at the bottom, it is 3000 by 2000 pixels. Okay, that's exactly what I want. I'm going to save this. File, save as. I'm going to save this as a Photoshop file. It was a JPEG. I'm going to save as a Photoshop file because we're also going to add a layer here with the information of our photographer. And a Photoshop file will have a .psd extension. So it's going to save it in the same folder as a Photoshop. And I'm also doing that because I'm going to show you a little script I ran or created to do our different sizes. All right. I'm going to add a layer. A couple ways you can add a layer here. One is you could go to the layer menu and you can choose new layer. You can also create a new layer down here. There's a little plus sign at the bottom left. You'll see a trash can to delete a layer, and right next to it's create a new layer. Now, generally I would do that if I wanted to draw some drawing on a layer. In this case, I want to add some text. So text is on its own layer. So if I come over to the left-hand side are my tools. You can think of an artist working at their desk and they have maybe a coffee cup with a bunch of brushes and scissors and things like that on their desk. That's their tools. So I'm going to choose a tool here of T, which allows me to add text. Now on each of the tools, or on some of the tools I should say, you'll see a little drop-down triangle in the corner, in the bottom right-hand corner. And that means that there are additional tools. If I right-click, I can see there are different tools here. So if I right-click on the text tool, there are 4 tools here. Oops. horizontal tool, the vertical type tool, a vertical type mask, and a horizontal mask tool. Let's ignore those last two. In this case, I really want to work with horizontal text. I want my text to run horizontally and not vertically. So I want to choose the horizontal tool. You also see there's a T here. And the T is the keyboard shortcut that allows you to select a tool from the keyboard. Okay. Actually, let's say I'm up here. This very top one allows me to move. Or just below that is a marquee that allows me to do a rectangular marquee to select an area. I can crop that way as well. But if I just press the letter T, it goes to the text tool. Okay, now I'm going to click down here towards the bottom. I'm going to put my author or my photographer information down here. It's a little bit big. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to change the size. So up at the top, we have a button ribbon or menu ribbon. And I'm going to change the size here down to, that's probably good, about 16 points. I'll leave it at Myriad Pro. I'm going to highlight through it and just say photo by. And I'm going to do a Command V to paste in that information that I got from Wikipedia. Okay. So I've now attributed this to the author. Now, some people put those things up here. It doesn't make a lot of sense as to what the author's name is. But that's how they uploaded it into Wikimedia. Oftentimes I might put, and you'll see this in the others, I'm not going to bother to do this here, I'll put the license. So, Creative Commons, attribution share alike would be a CC-S or CC-A-SA, and then the version number might be 3.0 or 4.0. You can get that information in the Wikimedia as well. All right, so now we have this image. If I wanted to make this a JPEG or a PNG file, I can come to the File menu. And first of all, I'm going to do Save. It's going to save my Photoshop file. I'm going to say OK for Maximize. And then I can come over to choose Save As. And here I can make this a PNG file or a JPEG file. If you have any transparency in your image, then you want to make it a PNG file. PNG includes the alpha channel, which contains the transparency. JPEG will not. JPEG also is a little more of a lossy format that's going to lose a little bit of information versus PNG. So PNGs tend to be larger than the JPEGs. Either one will work with Xcode. So I'm going to make this a PNG file and click Save. And you have to choose how large you want this file. This is a matter of compression to make the file smaller. I'm going to choose medium compression and click OK. Now, if I wanted to crop this image, and of course, cropping will get rid of additional things, but I can take the rectangular marquee and I can say, I want to just kind of get this area here, and I can select it. And notice up here towards the top left of my marquee, I can see the dimensions. So let's say I was targeting a particular dimension. I could say I want 2700 by 1600. So it takes kind of a steady hand, but hopefully I can kind of get there. Now I might get something really close and then come back into that image off the File menu and trim it a little more that way. Well, let's see if I can get this. Oops. 1600, so I'm trying to get the height down here first. So there is roughly 1600. And I think a trackpad's a little harder to do than with a mouse. And then I want it to be a little bit wider, say 2700. Okay, well, that's pretty close. 2701 by 1605. Again, I might bring it into go to image and trim it down even a little bit more. But that's how you can crop. You can also go to the edit menu. Oh, and I need to be on my image back here. By the way, background has some limitations. Notice my layer is called background because I opened this. I'm going to double click on that background. And I'm going to change the name to layer 0. That will allow me to do additional things, such as cropping this image. Under the edit menu, we have some things as far as I can transform this. I can scale it down here. I can even rotate the image. That might be if you shot an image on your phone and you shot it and it's coming in as portrait and you shot it really as landscape, you could rotate it here. Under the image menu, there is a crop option that you can crop it as well. Right now mine's grayed out, and I think I probably need to make, I guess that is the active layer. Anyways, there's always more than one way to do something in Photoshop. Okay, so what I want to show you now is how we need to save these out to bring into our XC assets. And I'm just going to show you what I've done previously. So I'm going to go to my Finder, and I have a folder here called iOS. Now I'm going to show you a little script to create this folder based on your images, and then to create those 3 different images for you. But I'm going to do this the hard way first. So I'm going to open up this folder, and you're going to see that every image has 3 versions, and I made these all as PNGs. So there's the name of the image, in this case Grand Canyon, the @ 1x dot my file extension, PNG. Then I have an @2x and an @3x. So the 2x, actually the 1x is going to be 1/3 of the 3x, and the 2x is basically going to be 67% of the 3x. So oftentimes when I'm designing images, I'll try to do multiples of 3. So it might have been better to do this as 4,500 by 3,000 pixels to start with. That makes the math a little bit easier. I use Excel a lot of times to figure out what these dimensions should be. What I need to do now is I need to go to the File menu and choose Save As. I'm going to make this a PNG file. And I'm going to name this Sedona @3x.png. And I'm going to save it in the same folder as my current Sedona images. Though really, I probably want it in the iOS folder, but I'm going to use my script to show you how to do that. Okay, so I'm going to say save. So there's my first one. I get to choose my compression. I'm going to say medium, okay. And then I'm going to go to the image size, and I need to reduce this down. Now, I have a nice multiple of 3,000 here, so I'm going to reduce this down with a 2,000. So actually, I guess I chose a pretty good measurement to start with. Notice that the height is going to be 67% of the 2,000, which is 1333. I'm going to click OK. Smaller image now. I'm going to go to the File menu and choose Save As. I'm going to make this a PNG file. And this one I want to rename as @2x. Okay, now I need to do that 1x. So I'm going to go to the File menu. Oh, I'm sorry, I'm going to go to the Image Size menu. Let's reduce this down to 1,000 pixels. So it's 1/3 of what we started with. My height is going to be 667. So 1/3 of the 2,000. And I'm going to go to the File menu and choose Save As. And this one will be Sedona @1x. And I want to make sure it's a PNG file. And click Save. So I now have my 3 versions. I'm going to show you those back here. So there are my 3 versions. Sedona @1x, Sedona @2x, Sedona @3x. And you can see that took a good 5 minutes to create all those versions. By the way, one thing you probably want to do, you don't want to accidentally click Save, because it's going to save it as the PSD, and it's going to save it with this 1,000. So a good habit to get into is to undo your image size. You can only undo the last thing. So if I choose Edit, well, I guess they changed this now. You can undo it again. Okay, there's my 3,000. You can also go back into the history, and there's a little panel here called History that you can go backwards in. So I want to make sure I get back to my 3,000 by 2,000 in case I accidentally File, Save, then I won't have the problem of it overwriting that old file with smaller dimensions. There's also revert here. So if you haven't saved anything, so again, I'm just going to change the size. So actually, let's do a couple of things. So there's an adjustment here. Let's say we wanted to make this a black and white image. Well, there's an adjustment here of black and white. And you can play with these different sliders as far as the different color channels and change the quality maybe a little bit of your black and white image to whatever meets your needs. So I made that black and white. If I click OK, cool, and I have a black and white image. If I want to undo that, again, I can go to the Edit menu and choose Undo. Let's do another image adjustment. So one that I like is hue and saturation. By the way, if you become a power user, the ones you'll primarily use are going to be levels and curves. There's also an exposure here. So if you take a photo and it's overexposed or underexposed, you can kind of fix that here a little bit. You can change the exposure. So let's say it was really overexposed, I can make it darker. If it's underexposed, I can make it lighter. You notice it definitely modifies our image quite a bit. It'd be very harsh. I'm going to click Cancel. Go back to Adjustments. So one I do use quite a bit is hue and saturation. And sometimes I have an image and I just want to lighten it up or make it a little bit darker. So I'll use this lightness to do that. So if I go this way, I'm basically kind of thinking of a dark screen over this or a lighter screen. So that's one way that I will make images darker or lighter. I can also change its saturation, which is how the color is absorbed. So I can make this really bold or I can mute it. Now the other kind of cool thing you can do here is you can colorize your image. So you want like a sepia tone. And you can actually change the hue here. So I want maybe a blue. I'm going to do a nice little blue. And again, I can adjust the saturation and make it bold or a little more saturated. And I can make it darker or lighter. Maybe I want like a nice little background screen with some text and stuff going on top of this. I want something really light. That's what I might use. I'm going to click Cancel here. Actually, let me do OK. So I now made that change. And maybe I do another change here. I've come in here and I have taken this image and let's do something really wild. I've come in and I've accidentally, or maybe intentionally, actually let me do this. I'm going to put a little border around this image. I'm going to cancel this. I'm going to take my image, I'm going to take my marquee, and I'm going to select a rectangular area with a little bit of margin all the way top, right, and bottom. And then I'm going to come to the Select menu and choose choose Inverse. And my marching ants of what is selected is no longer this area inside, it's the area on the outside. And then I can go to the Edit menu and choose Fill. And maybe I want to fill this with white. I get a little white border all the way around. Now I probably should have measured things a little bit carefully. This one's a little bit wider than the left. But that's how you can add a nice little border. There's other ways to do this using the image size and canvas size. So I might make it a little bit smaller and then take that image and go into canvas size and make it bigger, but fill the background with white. And you get a nice even edge all the way around. All right, so I've done a couple things. I have put this border around it, and I have also modified the adjustment color. I can go to the history menu, and I just want to show you can walk back. So here's my deselection of the marching ants, as I call them, which is my marquee. Here is the fill of the white. Here is the select the inverse. So everything I do in Photoshop is kept a history of, and I can go backwards. There's my rectangular marquee that I made. So I'm just going to kind of step back here one step at a time. So there is the unselection of the marquee. So you see the marching ants again. I'm going to undo the fill. I'm going to undo the rectangular marquee. And I actually have another marquee I created before that, so I can go back to that one. I can go back to the hue and saturation and undo that and go back to the deselect. And now I'm kind of back to where I started. So you can use that history to go backwards as well. So if you've done a bunch of stuff and you want to get back several steps, that's a quick way of doing it. Okay, I'm probably giving you a little more view of Photoshop than I intended here, but some of those things come in handy. It's a great program to learn and to master, and I use Photoshop a lot for all kinds of stuff. Okay, so I want to show you one more trick here. In Canvas, actually I'm going to jump over to Canvas so you can see this. It might be in week 2. So in the week 2 folder, I think that's probably where it's at. Yeah, I have a couple JavaScript files that I've written. One is called iOS Export JPEG and iOS Export PNG. And I'm going to encourage you to download these files and store them somewhere. I have mine on the desktop. I have them also in my iOS folder. It's just so I can get to them easily. And I have another one I'll have to put up here, which is an iOS export icons. So we get to creating our own icons later. You'll find these little JavaScript files helpful. Okay, so I've got a JPEG one and a PNG one. And what I did was I wrote a JavaScript that takes the image, and it has to be a PSD image. So I have to save it as PSD. It won't work on a JPEG or a PNG. And creates that 3x version, then resizes it down and names it appropriately, resizes it down to the 2x version and saves it named appropriately, resizes it down to the 1x version, saves it and renames it appropriately, and then takes it back to the original and the script ends. So I want to show you how that works and how this can save you a lot of time. You saw it took me 5 minutes or so to resize and save, and the chances of maybe making a mistake in naming the files and so forth can be a little problematic sometimes. So I'm going to go back to Photoshop. So here's my original 3000 by 2000 Sedona image. And I'm going to go to the File menu, come down to Scripts. And by the way, you can write all kinds of scripts in JavaScript to work with Photoshop. I'm going to go to Browse. And I'm going to go then to my desktop where I know I have these files. And there's my iOS Export JPEG, iOS Export PNG. And there's my icon one. So I'm going to do this as a PNG. I'm going to select that and just click Open. And I built in a couple of dialog boxes into the scripts. The first one asks you to give it a name, a base name. It's going to look at what is your current name. Maybe I want to change to something else. Maybe I want to change this to Sedona Street or Red Rocks or whatever, Red Rock Street. I'm going to leave it as Sedona. I'm going to click OK. And this is going to ask me what compression do I want for this PNG file. And I'm going to change this down to a 7. I'm going to click OK. And what it's doing is it's creating those 3 different images and writing out the PNG files.
What did the compression rate of 7 mean?
So it's basically a kind of a high or low high or high medium. So usually compression rates are between 1 and 9. And what it does is there's different algorithms that will reduce the file size by looking at the colors and nearby colors and creating a map of those colors that can be reduced in size. Now, as you compress, you will lose some quality, just to be aware of that. Typically, though, you want your files a little bit smaller because you don't want to have let's say we're doing a website. I don't want a huge file to be downloaded onto a web page when a smaller one will look just as good on that web page. So I might reduce the size, or I may also more likely reduce I might compress it, or I more likely might reduce the size. On a web page, I probably don't need a 3000 by 2000 version. But again, if I reduce the size and reduce the compression, that little bit of color loss is probably going to look great. So downloading that file onto your browser takes less time versus a larger file. And there actually is a tool in Photoshop that is built in that will allow you to look at what different compressions and different file formats will look like for an image. So I might want to look at what does a file look like as a PNG versus a JPEG versus a BMP. And there's a tool in Photoshop that allows you to do that with the different compression rates. And you can see what the image, a preview of what the image will look like. And that's a good way of choosing how you want to get this for a web page. In this case, these files are going to be embedded in our executable. But again, the larger the file, the larger that app is going to be and the more storage it's going to take on our device. Okay, so notice it said completed file exports. I'm going to click OK. And it did it all in probably less than a minute. Let me show you what it did. I'm going to go back to my Finder. So here was my Sedona PSD file. There are the images we created earlier. When I ran that script, it added or created these 3 files here. Notice they're named the same way. Sedona at 1x, Sedona at 2x, Sedona at 3x, they're all PNGs. And it put them in this iOS folder. So it created a folder of all of my different versions to go into Xcode. Yeah, I should have named it Xcode images or something. I just named it iOS. And the reason I named it iOS is I have another one out there for people who are doing Xamarin. So I teach a class in Xamarin, which is C#. And in Xamarin, we can use C# to create both Android and iOS. And so we have to create not only the 3 images for iOS, we have to create the 5 images for Android. And each of those different versions in Android go into a different folder. So the script for Xamarin that I've written puts all the iOS stuff in an iOS folder, and then it's got the 5 different Android folders for those different resolutions that Android requires, and names them the way Android wants them named. We're only worrying about iOS. So it goes into a folder called iOS. All these others I already created beforehand. Let me just show you the file that I did this with. So I have a Grand Canyon PSD file out here. I'm just going to open it up. So, and what I did here, let me scroll up a little bit. Well, it goes full screen. That'll make it easier. So now I should be able to scroll up a little bit. Okay, so I have layers in here. And what I did was I created a layer for each image. So here's my Montezuma Castle layer. And then I added a text layer of the text for that. And then I can save this as a PSD file. Actually, I don't even need to do that. It's saved as a PSD file already. I can run my script, and the only layers it's going to work on or display are those 2 layers. There's a little eyeball over here that I can turn a layer on or off. I run my script, and I create the Montezuma layer, or Montezuma files. Creates those 3 files. Then I come back in, and I turn on my Grand Canyon layer, and the text that goes with that. Now notice the other layers turned on. They're just hidden. This is a opaque layer. I can't see what's behind it. And I run my script, and it creates 3 Grand Canyon images. Then here's Hoover Dam. Turn the image and the text layer on, run my script. And these are all the same size, which makes it really handy. So what I did is I started with 1 image, and then I resized the other images to that same size. They're all in this one Photoshop file, so they're all the same size, which will look great in our app that we're going to create, because we're going to have 1 image viewer, and we want to display all these images, and that image viewer is not going to change size for us. We can make it change sizes, but we want to make it standard, so it looks really nice. And there then is my Sedona Oak Creek West Fork image. So if I'm working on a project, I try to do everything in 1 Photoshop file, just keep everything together. That way I don't have 4 different Photoshop files out there. And then I can easily run my scripts on whatever layers I want to have being visible. That is a quick down and dirty overview of Photoshop. As you can see, there's a whole lot of stuff here. I would encourage you to take our Photoshop class if you're not familiar with Photoshop. You'll also find tons of stuff out on YouTube. There's online courses that are fairly inexpensive through places like Udemy, udemy.com. There's video courses on all kinds of stuff. Not only just technology, they have courses on how to play the guitar, how to cook Thai food, all kinds of stuff, all kinds of courses.
Adobe has a book that we used in my course. It's called Adobe Photoshop CC, Classroom in a Book.
Yeah.
That's really nice.
So those are put out by Pearson, and Adobe manages all those. They are great hand-holding thing. Any book by Scott Kelby is a guru. There's several gurus. Scott Kelby has written all kinds of books on Photoshop. He's kind of moved away from writing Photoshop books, now more photography books. There used to be a photo user magazine that he put out that every month came out with all these tips and tricks and so forth. Matt Kloskowski is another one. Dave Cross is another guru. In fact, he just did a free 3 or 4 day conference, online conference that you could attend and get all the impacts. He had all the content. He had different speakers presenting different things about Photoshop, and you could watch those and give different tips and tricks. It was all free. It was only good though for a short period of time. But if you look for Dave Cross, some of that stuff might be out on YouTube now. I attended and got some really good stuff from him. There's also, so Scott Kelby also puts on Photoshop World, which is a conference. Used to be several times, like every quarter in different cities, or maybe twice a year on the East Coast, West Coast. I think he's still doing those. It is the best conference I have ever gone to. I went to one early on about 15 years ago in San Francisco. And the nice thing, I'd never seen this before in a conference, was they gave a book about this thick of all the conference proceedings. So everybody was presenting had all their handouts in this book with step-by-step tutorials.
Oh, nice.
That was probably Photoshop version 4. So it was a long time ago. I've now seen other conferences do the same thing, but I think he was kind of a cutting edge of doing that back then. And the people presented were all the people that were well known in the Photoshop industry and have written all kinds of books. And so if you have an opportunity to go to Photoshop World, it's well worth it.
So in the business realm, if you were developing apps,
mm-hmm.
how would you communicate to your customer how their art department needed to provide you files?
So there's a couple of things you can do. So yes, if they have an art department, you could have them, if they're using Photoshop, you could have them send you PSD files, and then you can run these scripts. I ask that you not distribute these scripts beyond this course, but you're free to use them for your own personal use. And then, so they can provide them that way, or you could tell them, hey, I need everything resized down to, 3 times, 2 times, and 1 time. If they're willing to do that, that's less work for you.
Mm-hmm.
If you're working on a contract and you have to resize these images, I'd make sure that I include that in my estimate of what I'm going to charge them. So they can provide you the PSD files. They can provide you a JPEG or a PNG file for that matter. You can open it in Photoshop, save it as a PSD, and run the scripts. That'll work.
Mm-hmm.
So kind of whatever they have available to them, make sure that they're providing, non-copyrighted images unless they own the copyright. So if they own the copyright and you're doing this for a customer, then you're good. But make sure they're not just going out and grabbing stuff off the internet. I've seen that happen too many times. And copyright is huge. And it's kind of blurry these days with how easy it is to steal stuff. But it's an important thing to consider. All right. Does that help you? Does that answer the question?
Yeah.
Okay. Same with if you're going to include audio, if they have an audio department, or they're going to do maybe voiceover recordings of somebody that they want you to use, they can provide those. We'll look at how to incorporate sound down the road as well. I don't know if we'll do any video stuff, but maybe. If you just jumped into this video, you can see all the videos from the iOS app development cohort playlist by clicking on the image in the lower right. And if you'd like to be alerted to future videos that I create, you can click my picture up in the top right and subscribe to the channel.